Yo, what's going on, everybody? It is your boy Nick here, back again with a brand new video today. So today's movie review is, well, an interesting one. Today we're going to be reviewing Madam Web, which is the new installment in the Sony Spider-Man universe and was directed by S.J. Clarkson. As I'm sure many of you guys have been seeing online, Madam Web has been getting extremely negative reviews. And this review is going to be interesting because ultimately this is a movie that I didn't think was very good. However, I still kind of enjoyed it, which might seem very counterintuitive, but I'm going to explain with my script here why I feel the way I feel about this film. Starting first off with the things I liked about Madam Web. I thought Dakota Johnson did a better job than I expected her to do. I mean, like, her performance is by no means exceptional or anything like that, but she tried her best with the material that she was given. She actually, like, wasn't too bad. I thought she was a good enough presence in the movie. Also, I thought Sydney Sweeney was pretty good as Julia Cornwall. And before you guys go to the comments and correct me and say it's Julia Carpenter, for whatever reason, when I was watching the movie, they called her Julia Cornwall, even though the character in the comics is called Julia Carpenter. I don't know what happened there. I can't even describe how weird that is, but that's what her character was called. I thought Sydney Sweeney was pretty good in the movie, I guess. I mean, to be fair, I'm not really all that familiar with Sydney Sweeney's acting. I've not really seen much with her in it. I saw her in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and she's like barely in that movie. I have not seen Euphoria or White Lotus or anything like that, so my actual knowledge of her acting skills is not very high, but I thought she was alright in the movie. Of the three supporting characters, I thought she was the best one. Adam Scott actually did a pretty decent job in the movie with what he had. Again, he's not exceptional or anything like that, but like Dakota Johnson, he's doing a good enough job with the material he was given, and him and Dakota actually have some interesting scenes together, so there's that. I thought Celeste O'Connor had some funny moments. I mean, they're not exactly a likable character or anything like that, but I thought Celeste was, to a certain extent, the comic relief of the movie a little bit. I don't know, they had some scenes I thought were kind of funny, but I don't know, I thought Celeste did an okay job with what they were given. Isabella Marquette, I have no idea how you pronounce her name. Her character had some interesting stuff going for her, and I thought her performance was fine, but not really a whole lot to go off of. But I think if, one thing about this movie was kind of, saved it a little bit, it's the fact that the acting across the board is semi-decent enough. There was no extraordinary standout performances, but I thought the acting was alright. They were watchable, so I'll give them that. The chemistry between the characters is fine, but they are kind of annoying at times, especially between our three supporting characters. It does kind of work with the story, though. It's kind of interesting enough, because when they first meet, none of them know each other, and they're kind of bickering and fighting a lot, so it can feel a little bit annoying, because it's like you're feeling these characters, or seeing these characters who just can't get along, fight, and it can feel a little bit awkward, but they do progress a little bit as the movie goes on, so they're far more likable by the end, which is something I can appreciate. And the film does also have a decent visual style. There were some shots I thought were kind of nice. It does have a little bit of a messy color palette, so it's a somewhat dull-looking movie, but I don't know, there were some scenes and sequences and locations I thought were kind of pretty, so I don't know, the film has a decent enough visual style. And the actual premise of the movie is very intriguing, I will say, because the whole premise of Madam Web's character is that she can see into the future and predict the future, and she has to try and stop certain things from happening, so it's a very intriguing premise. I will say that's one of the other things about the movie that did keep me invested the whole way through. That's all the stuff that I did like about Madam Web. Now we're going to go into what didn't work about the movie. So even though I thought the acting was decent enough, I did feel like there were some scenes where the acting was kind of flat, mainly in some of the scenes between the characters meeting each other for the first time. It's like they should kind of be, I don't know, they're kind of annoying because they're arguing with each other, but it's also none of you have ever met before, so I don't know, I feel like they could, I don't know, I can't really describe it. It's just there were some scenes between these characters where it felt kind of flat, where they kind of were talking to Madam Web and they were like, oh yeah, I kind of know you because of this, or I kind of know you because of that, and it didn't seem overly surprised by it or anything. It was kind of just there. So there were some scenes where the acting was a little bit flat. Here's the main big issue with Madam Web, though, is that the story was convoluted, it was confusing, and it even had some plot holes that I just did not understand. I also might add that I thought Tahar Rahim was extremely underwhelming as Ezekiel, who was just an outright bad villain. It's kind of a shame because Ezekiel did actually have some fairly violent things going on with him, so he could have been a really menacing villain, but he was not very well written at all. I don't know what else Tahar Rahim has been in, so I'm not saying that he's a bad actor, but he was just very underwhelming as this character, and I can't really say that I put much blame on him because his character is poorly written, but I don't know, man. It's just the villain just did not work at all for me, really, aside from like some potential that they had. Going back to the story, though, the story doesn't really have a good flow or a good story structure. The movie really does feel like more of a 2-hour trailer for Spider Women than it is actually a Spider Women story. Hell, calling it an origin story is even stretching it a little bit, because the movie really feels like a prequel to what could have been a pretty decent Spider Women movie, if I'm being completely honest. And that's the thing, is like it feels like a prequel to like what could have been a good Spider-Woman movie, and because it feels kind of like a prequel almost, like that's that feel it has, there's so much that you don't know. Like there's so much exposition in this movie. They're kind of like just vaguely kind of going about things like, okay, here we'll talk a little bit about this character, we'll talk a little bit about this, but there's just so much of it that it's all just very vaguely brushed over. And that's kind of a shame, because I thought the acting was decent enough had the writing been better, and had the actors, like, I thought given it more, I really felt like it could have just been a lot better. There's also some scenes with the acting where I feel like they should be really scared and they're like kind of holding back a little bit, and I feel like it's the actors being like, I mean, the script is not the best, so like we'll try and get through it as much as we can, but I'm not sure if we fully buy into this story. That's kind of how this movie feels. Like I said, the premise is really interesting, and we do explore Madam Web's powers a little bit, but there's some more things that need some explanation. Like Madam Web's powers, I think, are very interesting. We get some interesting like sequences with it, some interesting vignettes, but there's some things about her powers that I don't fully understand. It's because I feel like the writers just didn't do a good enough job of going out of their way to explain it. There's a sequence near the end of the movie that I thought was very, like, actually kind of cool, but they never hinted towards anything, so it felt a little bit out of left field, and I was like, would you mind explaining to us how this about her powers works exactly? So that was really frustrating watching that part in the movie. It's also kind of hard to call this a superhero movie because there's barely any superhero things in it. I mean, like I said, the movie is really just about Madam Web learning a little bit about her powers, and she's also saving 3 girls from the villain, but they pretty much don't have very many opportunities to do superhero-like things. And look, I respect Marvel for trying to do something outside the box and might not necessarily have everything just be an explosion every 30 seconds or whatever, but the story is just as messy can be, so I just don't feel like this stepping outside the box thing worked very well at all. That's kind of thing. This movie really feels more like a movie about these 4 characters hanging out and getting to know each other just a little bit, but it's like the story is so poorly written and the villain is so poorly written, and it's like it's so poorly constructed. The characters are very undercooked, so they're kind of entertaining while they're there. Like I was able to get intrigued by the premise, and I was kind of able to be like, okay, you're a little bit interesting, I kind of like you, but they don't really do a whole lot with it. So it's a very underdeveloped, undercooked story. There's even some decisions that the characters make that just made no sense to me. This is going to be a spoiler-free review. I'm not going to spoil the movie, but if I made a spoiler review about this movie, which I'm not sure if I'll do that or not, there was quite a few scenes where I was just like, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Why did that happen the way it did, and how exactly does this work? There's just like I said, plot holes or inconsistencies, and I'm like, wait, how exactly does this all come together? That like, if I did a spoiler review, I would sound very cynical about this movie. So maybe I'll do a spoiler review. I don't entirely know yet, but there's quite a few scenes like that where it did kind of take me out of the movie a little bit. The action sequences were mediocre. I will say, though, I do think the action sequences are getting a little bit overhated, because I appreciated that they didn't overuse the CGI in the action sequences. Like, it wasn't, like, there was CGI, obviously, but I didn't feel like they were overusing it, and there was a fair bit of practical, which I actually appreciated quite a bit. So it did stand out a little bit in that aspect, but outside of that, there was nothing about the sequences that stood out, not even from a choreography standpoint or from a visual standpoint. So outside of the fact that they didn't overuse CGI, and outside of the fact that they used more practical than typical, the action sequences were kind of bad. So that's unfortunate. The editing was also quite bad in some scenes, and like one of the things about the editing that did kind of like take me out of it a little bit was that with Madam Web's powers, you kind of hear the reactions that she's having, so it kind of took me out of it a little bit. It reminded me a lot about Electro's powers in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where they had like weird electronic sounds mixed in with the score, because it's supposed to be like his stress or his thoughts, and it's very distracting. The editing kind of feels that way about Madam Web. Sometimes there's just a very loud scare, very loud like jump scare sound that's like, that takes me out of it a little bit. It's kind of distracting. It's like we could have had some pacing, we could have had some tension, and instead you went out of there, and it kind of just took me out of it a little bit. So that was something I wasn't a fan of. And I have no idea why, but there was also an absurd amount of Pepsi product placement in the movie. Like, they were drinking Pepsi earlier in the movie, and I was like, okay, whatever, it's Pepsi, I don't care. But then, like, we had a whole bunch of stuff going on at, like, a Pepsi factory, I guess, like the action sequences in front of a Pepsi sign. I was like, okay, how much did Pepsi pay to get this promo in the movie? Because it felt like I was watching a Marvel-themed Pepsi commercial in certain scenes, which is very Not something that I think you should have in your movie. I don't know. And there's also a lot of teasing of Spider-Man. That's also what's very upsetting about this movie. I said like it feels like a 2-hour trailer. It feels like a setup almost for a Spider-Woman movie. There's also so much teasing about a Spider-Man existing in this universe, but they're just little teases. And like, had the story been better, I would be okay with it. It's like, okay, it's a good story, and then they're teasing something that could happen in the future, but it's not a good story, and they're just teasing a bunch of stuff that it makes it feel like it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna have Spider-Man come out soon. It's just we're not gonna do it now. So for now, here's your half-baked side character movie, which is very frustrating. I did also feel like the movie was very safe. There was nothing really at risk in the movie, which is a shame because, like I said, the villain is violent, and I feel like they had potential to be risky. I feel like they had potential to make a great villain because what the actual villain wants to do in the movie, I mean, it's a bit weirdly written, but it's like, that could potentially be menacing if you just executed it well. And sadly, it wasn't executed well, so it felt very safe, unfortunately. And I can't say this for sure, but I do feel like there probably were some reshoots because there's scenes in the trailer that also do come out in the movie, but they're vastly different, and the trailer only came out 3 months ago, which is very weird to me. Like, there's that one scene in the movie where the three characters are like in the forest and talking to each other, and it's just like you see in the trailer, but some dialogue is switched up a little bit. Like, they're saying essentially the same thing, but the lines are slightly different. The person saying it is like not the person who said it in the trailer, and I'm like, why is that? Like, did they just use like takeout scenes from just from filming for the trailer or for the movie or whatever, or were these reshot? I'm very confused. I don't know. It felt very messy and just out of left field for me. I don't understand why it was like that. This movie felt like it was spending too much time on setting up potential for these Spider-Women that it forgot to be a good story. And it feels like Sony was definitely making this so they could keep the rights to these characters. I think that's also very sad because S.J. Clarkson, who's the director of the movie, I have it written right here, the filmmaker is not bad. At no point throughout the movie did I ever think to myself, this is not a good director. I was like, this is a director who clearly has some talent, obviously, but the movie is being funded by a company who's intervening in it too much and who's messing too much with the story because they want to preserve the rights, and it just like shows so obviously. So I hope that S.J. Clarkson can hopefully get some more work in the future, because I would want for directors to get more work. But it's kind of a shame that someone that has a fair bit of talent, I would say, in terms of directing, kind of got stuck directing this really colossal mess of a story, which is really unfortunate. And because I said like the characters were more likable towards the end, I did kind of like them a little bit more towards the end. I wouldn't mind seeing these characters again, but they really need to be put in a good story, especially considering how intriguing the premise was. Like, I would not mind seeing these Spider-Women in a Spider-Women movie or anything like that. It's just that, because it's like this feels like a prequel to what could have been a good movie, I feel like they're gonna really have to pull at strings to make a really good Spider-Women movie. Otherwise, the universe is screwed. And they might not even make it, because this movie might flop. I have no idea. I know that this movie's been getting a lot of comparison to Morbius, as you want to talk about a little bit. Morbius was not a great movie, but if you saw my review for Morbius, you guys know that I liked it a little bit, because Morbius actually had some really interesting things going for it. I just felt like, in the end, it suffered from being too short and from being rushed and from being maybe just a little bit too tempered or whatever. But at least the story made sense and like had a premise that kind of worked. It just wasn't fully fleshed out very well. Switching up the camera a little bit because the lens is pointing a little bit towards my desk, sorry. That's kind of like the thing about Morbius and Madam Web is kind of interesting, is that people have been saying like we owe Morbius an apology because of how messy Madam Web was. That's kind of the thing, is that I will say, like, Madam Web, I was entertained watching it, kind of like how I was entertained watching Morbius, but these two movies, when I watch Madam Web, it's like the flaws just stick out so much. As we're with Morbius, it's like, this was potentially a really good movie, but there's just some things it needed. So when you compare the two movies, you start to realize that Morbius is just far better than Madam Web, which might be kind of sad because Morbius is not a great movie. So yeah, and that's kind of like my big question overall here is, where does the Sony Spider-Man universe go from here? I'm semi-optimistic about Kraven because Kraven's going to be rated R, so maybe it'll be good, but I don't really have a lot of faith in it. I'm still very much looking forward to Venom 3, because I know the two Venom movies are not amazing, and they're a bit of an acquired taste, but I really enjoyed the first two Venom movies, and Venom is single-handedly carrying the Sony Spider-Man universe. So, I don't know, like Venom 3 I'm very much looking forward to, and I'm semi-optimistic about Kraven, but I don't know, after how lackluster Morbius was, and after how much of a mess Madam Web was, I don't really know where the Sony Spider-Man universe goes from here on out, because like really, Spider-Man is doing really well right now with the MCU and with the Spider-Verse, and people do want to see a Spider-Man 4 or an Amazing Spider-Man 3, which has potential to be really good. But with the Sony Spider-Man universe, it's like, where are we going from here? I don't really know what they're trying to set up, and it doesn't seem like they're doing all that well of a job. It kind of feels like they're setting up a few things they're putting a little bit of care into, and they're building other stuff because they want to preserve rights. So the universe is a mess, and I don't know where it's going to go from here on out. So that was like the objective criticisms of the movie. If you want to know my actual overall thoughts, I actually kind of liked the movie, oddly enough, but I acknowledge that it's kind of bad. And that's the thing, like, it's probably going to go down as a guilty pleasure for me, because the thing is that I was entertained by the premise and by the semi-decent acting. I was able to, like, get engaged with it and actually, like, be entertained the whole way through. But, like, it is a bad movie, objectively speaking, because, like, the story just really needed a lot of work. I do feel the critics are being just a little bit harsh on it, though, because, like, yes, it's a mess and it is kind of bad, but it does have a few redeeming qualities that I feel like should earn it something. And I mean, it's bad, but, like, it's not the Emoji Movie. I mean, God. So final verdict. Madam Web might be enjoyable if you want to just shut off your brain and just go to the movies for 2 hours, but if you're a film critique, you're probably not going to have a fun time. So that's kind of my opinion on Madam Web. I personally had fun with it. I enjoyed it enough. I didn't hate it. I probably wouldn't even go as far as say that I disliked it, but objectively, it's kind of bad. So it's kind of like a guilty pleasure for me. And this is interesting because I'm going to give my grade first and my rating last, which is not the order I usually do. But I'm going to give Madam Web an overall grade of a C-, which is my highest negative grade. The lowest movie I ever did in this series was Morbius, which I gave a C, because that's my lowest positive grade. Like I said, Morbius was a movie that had a lot of potential, had some good stuff, but just needed some work. And because it wasn't great, it ended up getting my lowest positive grade. And Madam Web was bad. It was bad, but because I was entertained by it, I was like, I'll go at a happy medium and give it the C-. That way it gets my highest negative grade. And for an overall rating, I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10, which might sound higher than the way I'm describing the movie, but it's like, I personally had fun with it. I was entertained by it. I didn't think to myself, oh wow, what a waste of my time, but I do acknowledge it's not exactly that great of a film. So the entertainment scale is not high. It's only a 6.5 out of 10, but you know, it's also not overly low either, so do with that what you will. I hope you guys enjoyed my review on Madam Web. I'm not sure if I'm going to do a spoiler review or not. Maybe not. Don't get your hopes up, because I really don't know if I would enjoy doing that video. However, I am going to post a video, hopefully sometime over the next week, about 2 recent movies I thought were very good, and I'm going to leave those a surprise, because I can't wait to post that video. Let me know what you guys thought about Madam Web in the comments below. Just make sure to keep all toxicity out of it. I don't want any toxic stuff going down in my comments. Thank you guys so much as always for watching the video. If you want to support the channel, definitely make sure to hit the like button, as it really helps out. Feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell to get notified about my latest videos, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace!